Hello and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. Today we are looking back at the British Grand Prix which took place last weekend, and it was a return to the top step of the podium for Lewis Hamilton, who 2.5 years after his last win in Saudi Arabia in 2021. He is back on the top of the podium, beating out Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, kind of marking a resurgence in form of the Mercedes. But obviously you've got Verstappen and Norris behind them challenging as well. It was a race of wet and dry conditions, a race where some teams kind of rose to the top and others maybe fell away a little bit. And obviously we'll be discussing all that and more today. I'm joined today by Callum, Oscar and Chinmay, and as we normally do, we'll start off with our ratings out of 10. So Callum, I'll come to you first. I mean, what would you give that race out of 10? I know you were there, so you probably got a more like objective view than most.
Well, certainly if I'd say if it's quite an odd one really, because on the first 8 laps when it was, Verstappen looked like he was on a good pace and it didn't really look like Norris was touching. All right, Hamilton and Russell were out in front, but it was seeming like nothing was really happening. But then as it got to the end, I think it recovers from that. I'm tempted to give a 9, maybe even a 10 really, because it was, I think, just the scenes that you're seeing from all of the fans and how much it means to them, how much it means to Hamilton, and it just feels like one of the reasons why we love the sport so much is because it can have that effect on the drivers and on the fans. Just the magic of Hamilton winning at home once again. And I think that for me, even though we only saw maybe a few overtakes, and it wasn't I guess your typical entertaining race of having lots of crashes and like overtakes, just the conclusion that we ended up with perhaps made up for it, and certainly made up for all the rain that we had that Silverstone attendees had to experience throughout the weekend. So yeah, I'd give it a 9 or a 10.
Yeah, I mean, Oscar, would you agree with that, 9 or 10, or maybe something a bit different?
Yeah, I think for me it would be a 9, because you kind of have everything you want to see from like hardcore racing. You know, you want to see strategies going wrong for teams. You want to see people punching above their weight like Hulkenberg did, but also, you know, you saw things that were also continuing, like the decline of Perez, or, you know, Ferrari starting to struggle a bit more. So yeah, it was really entertaining. I don't think there was one team on that grid on Sunday that wasn't interesting to be following along with, and being able to sit in the stands, watch it unfold is brilliant race, especially for Hamilton. So yeah,
another 9 out of 10. Chinmay, you agree with that?
Yeah, I'll definitely give it a 9 out of 10. You know, it was a very, very pure race. You know, we saw the strategy, we saw the changing weather, good on-track action. I think we had the whole lot, to be honest. I think I'm a bit of an evil human being, especially in Formula 1, so there wasn't as much crash as I was hoping. But yeah, so I think that's the only point that's reason why it's not a 10 out of 10. But I think all in all, it was actually a really good race. Silverstone delivered as usual. So yeah, there's nothing else to really say on that from my end.
Yeah, and I'd probably give it a 9 out of 10 as well. I think it's really marked a point where we've gone back to, I think it's like, you think back to maybe a 2012, where you're now coming into a weekend and you really don't know who is going to be in the quickest car. Like, we thought Mercedes, it was kind of a one-off last week that they were kind of competing up the top, but they came here and were probably the quickest car on most of the laps. And Russell, I think, got quite unlucky. And then obviously at the end you have a battle between Norris, Verstappen and Hamilton for the win. And like, when the whole race, maybe with the exception of the first 10 laps, but even then we know the rain's coming in, when the whole race is entertaining, I don't think it can be much better than that. And I think
I'm surprised you're giving it only a 9 out of 10. Because
given
your messages on the group chat throughout the duration of the race, especially when Hamilton was leading, I thought it was going to be a certain 10 out of 10.
I've got a bit. I feel like a 10 out of 10 is reserved for those races you'll talk about.
That's true, yeah.
Like your Canada 2011s, I'm trying to think of another example, but definitely like a race that you'll talk about for years. I think this is one that will be spoken about for a long time. We may as well jump into it, obviously, because Hamilton has won it. But without maybe Hamilton winning it, and I guess that's a very like counterfactual. It is a very good race, but maybe it's not like elevated to that all-timer status. And I think, as I said, we'll start with that. I mean, Callum, you were at the track, and I'd imagine that watching kind of a Hamilton win for the first time in 2.5 years at the British Grand Prix, surrounded by fans who are obviously supporting both Norris and Hamilton, was one of the most insane experiences that you can have at an F1 track.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, I'm sure Oscar would agree with me on this. It's insane to see the level of support that he has. He not even for his win, but even during the periods. I remember last year when obviously the Mercedes car was really as bad as we've ever seen it in the past decade, really. And still every lap that he goes by, the crowd are cheering him, and I think it just meant so much to those fans, especially after a season and a couple of years where we've had Max Verstappen dominating completely. It did mean a lot to them to see finally. It kind of seemed, although yes, we have had obviously Norris managing to beat him in Miami, but it did seem very special to have their kind of home hero manage to get by. And as I say, the noise from all of the crowd as he was going around on his final lap, and also on the lap which he led with the flag, which might add I correctly predicted, which we'll go into later. It was amazing to see, and and you could also see how much it meant to him as well as he really probably showed his emotion, probably unlike anything we've ever seen, really. So yeah, it did feel special to be witnessing it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, like you said with the emotion, I don't think I've ever seen like him or Hamilton react in that way after a win. And I guess, Oscar, you were also at the track. I mean, is that kind of your experience of what you had?
I mean, I can openly say I'm not the biggest Hamilton fan in the world. But a lot of the people I was with were. So, but it is something special, seeing Hamilton win at Silverstone. It feels like everything was right for like one day. That if he was to win any race this year, it should be and could be this one. And yeah, even not his biggest fan, as I said, like genuinely an incredible drive, commanding performance. Overtakes. He had it all to win, and he did it. So, incredible race, really.
It's the first time I think I actually saw or like properly realised how much Hamilton actually struggled, I guess, in the kind of past few years with the Mercedes being so downtrodden compared to the rest of the pack. Because you think, oh, come on, he's a 7-time world champion. He's never really going to be doubting himself, or he's not going to mind being off for a few years, but that is obviously what he came out saying after his win, and you can very easily believe him by the emotion he's showing to be back on the top step of the podium. And so I thought that was quite enlightening to be able to properly see that and realize that for the first time. I
think that's probably an offshoot of what happened in 2021 as well. I think when you do lose a title in that way, and obviously we could debate for hours on whether what happened in Abu Dhabi, but when you lose a title in that way and then come into the next 2 seasons and the car isn't maybe up to scratch, maybe Hamilton didn't feel his own performances were up to scratch, I can imagine it can get a bit difficult. And then you've come into this season, maybe at the start of 2024, he's obviously in a Mercedes that maybe isn't as competitive, and he's not maybe matching up to George Russell as much. But but as the car has improved, he's kind of got closer and closer. And I imagine it being the home track, it being Silverstone, and it like out of every track, like a driver wants to win. I think the two are Monaco and their home race. Those are the two like big ones for a driver, and just being able to finally step back on the top step of the podium for him, I would imagine, was very like releasing, and obviously just marked that although like after all the hard work that had been put in over the last few years, he was able to kind of just get back to that. And it was, I think, like, and we'll come on to this in a second, obviously with McLaren, but it was as on merit as kind of you could get. Like, it wasn't a lucky maybe first place has had an engine retirement. It wasn't. I'm not saying George Russell's. It wasn't like a Russell last week where it's very much the top two have crashed and you've kind of stepped into that position. He was fighting the entire way through the race, and it was just a merited win. It was on pace, on merit, and ultimately he deserved it, and no one can take that away from him.
There were a lot of correct calls made by Mercedes, especially with the difficult changing conditions. We see how equally you can get that wrong with, well, I would say McLaren, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a little while. But I think Mercedes would definitely care a lot more about this one compared to last weekend, because as you say, it's yes, although you've got to be up there, it's really not on pure pace. Mercedes weren't leading the race in Austria. It was very much because of the tangle between Verstappen and Norris. But Mercedes, a long way throughout the race really, before the rain came, obviously got pole position. Mercedes 1-2 for the start of the race, and made some really great calls in terms of the tyre choices that they put on, and would have been a great points weekend for them had it not been for that unfortunate reliability issue with Russell. And so I think Mercedes will be happy to take a lot away from this and build on it for the rest of the season for sure.
Yeah, and I guess we'll move on to McLaren now, because I think for me, what you saw very much was the difference in experience at the front, and I think like we mentioned it last week, and I think it has continued into this week. When you have Mercedes and Hamilton and Russell, Red Bull and Verstappen, like they're so experienced at the front. They know to let the drivers kind of make the calls. They know what to kind of do. And then on the other hand, you have at the moment McLaren and Norris, who I think both need to hold their hands up at that. Or McLaren and Norris, and not just Norris as well, Piastri. And I think McLaren in particular, the team needs to probably hold their hands up and say, yeah, we didn't do that as well as we could. And I think Norris to maybe a lesser extent. I'll come to you, Chinmay. I mean, we were discussing this before we started. Do you think it is that lack of experience for McLaren at the moment at the top? Not obviously they've got experience in the past, but over recent years they've been very much nearer the back of the grid, and now they are at the front. They are just making kind of too many mistakes, and that is costing them. Of like the last 4 races, I think Norris could have won all of them, and he's won none of them. Do you think that is costing them at the moment?
Yeah, I think there is a definite lack of experience issue, as well, because technically this is the first time since 2012 really that McLaren are actually at the front of the grid. It's been a while, and obviously a lot of personnel have changed since then as well. Obviously, you've got 2 young drivers as well. Oscar Piastri, don't forget, it's only his 2nd season of Formula One. Lando Norris has only really had a year or so in race winning contention, and as well we've seen a lot in the last 4 or 5 races alone that Lando still needs to maybe develop that little bit extra maturity when it comes to race pace and management and making those key decisions and that sort of stuff. So yeah, obviously, yeah, the lack of experience does make a pain as well, but I think also there has just been a total just seems to be just a lack of consistency, especially with the strategy in McLaren as well. I mean, obviously we all know about Ferrari and their shenanigans with strategy and all that sort of stuff, and I do feel like we're seeing a lot of similar characteristics with McLaren at the moment. Obviously, unfortunately, do have seemed to clean themselves up a little bit as well, but then now the car performance has dipped over the last few races, which doesn't exactly help them. But then obviously, McLaren arguably have got the fastest car on the grid at points as Mercedes, points as Red Bull. Again, we've got such a good sort of gap between the top 3 or 4 teams now that is actually quite difficult. So now it's all about the fine margins, and I guess that sort of McLaren, I always feel like has had hints of that issues with the fine margins, but they've either just been good enough to stay where they've been. But I guess then again, it's all about that. Like I saw, literally leaving Piastri a lap later ruined his entire race. Is a good example. So I guess it's just that.
I think the situation with Norris, it felt quite similar. Was it Spain where he had that tyre choice? And because obviously he had a choice at the end, does he go onto the softs or does he go onto the new mediums? And once again, his idea was looking to the front, which I guess is optimistic. But then is that saying that should he be more realistic perhaps about his situation again, like what we said before? Because I'm guessing his idea was on this being on the softs was that he wanted to keep up with the pace of Hamilton in front and try and go for the race win. But actually, what he should have done is perhaps gone to the new medium so that he was more likely to stay ahead of Verstappen. Because obviously, what we know in the end is that he was on the softs and the performance, to be fair, the Red Bulls were very good on the hard tyre, probably more than they expected so, but his tyres probably did start to drop off by the end of the race, and that's the reason that he got a third instead of a second. And so perhaps he should have been, again, a bit more realistic about his situation. And I guess that comes with a bit of an experience as well, of like kind of wanting to chase the race win and being kind of overwhelmed with wanting to get that rather than being realistic about your situation. So I don't know, that kind of moment struck me as quite similar to what happened a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of races ago, with the same situation and just showing, again, that bit of inexperience compared to perhaps his competitors.
I mean, yeah, I'm going to jump in here if that's right. I think the thing with Norris is the entire weekend, we watched like all the driver interviews on like the stages and stuff, and all the weekend his rhetoric was kind of, I want to win this race. There's nothing I want more than to win this race. So he clearly, in my mind, had something very set out, and the fact that he felt like maybe he wasn't going to get it made him make decisions that maybe weren't sensible but more risky. Obviously, it didn't work, but I think there were people who tried even riskier strategies, mainly Ferrari, and they didn't quite pan out as they thought they would. But he still had quite a good race, and I'm sure in the future, he'll build on this now. He'll learn from this experience, and he'll come back and get a race win. Yeah.
I mean, contrary, I guess, to what we've been saying here, I don't put this on Norris as much. I think this is on McLaren. I think, right, Norris has clearly made a mistake going long in the pit box, probably costing him a second or so. But I think even if Norris has come out ahead of Hamilton, I do think Hamilton still would have won that race, because at the end of the day, I think Norris was just put on the wrong tyres, and it's at times like those where you rely on the knowledge and the data that the team have to say which tyre is going to be the best one for the final 12 laps. I mean, we saw the softs drop off for Norris. It was really, I think we can say that Hamilton was able to make them last just because he's got very good like tyre preservation skills. Like we've seen that before in various different races. But McLaren, when they were calling him in, they were telling him too much information. It was, do you want to go on softs to try and beat Hamilton? Do you want to go on hards to try and hold Verstappen? Like, at that time, or especially when you compare it to Hamilton and Verstappen's radio messages, which were very much like, okay, you're going onto the softs, let us know when you want to come in. Like, it's nice, it's clear, everyone knows what they're doing. Um, and instead, McLaren are just bombarding him with information, which can't be helpful. And he doesn't know what the best tyres will be. He can only guess, and it's the data that McLaren have that can tell him, or that can just put him on the right tyres, and then he can go and do what he can do. And I think that was the problem they had with Piastri as well. Like, they did pit him a lap too late. Clearly dropped him from second to, I think it was sixth in the end, behind even Sainz. And I think with his pace on at the end of the race, like he would have been touch and go for the win. I think Piastri can honestly, like, he's been getting very unlucky this season with kind of strategy and things like that. And I think ultimately it's just McLaren need to just again, yeah, get their act together. They need to just knuckle down and think, okay, we want something out of this race. We want to win. Like, we're just gonna give our driver the best that they can do. And I think for me, it's just when you're competing against, like, definitely Verstappen and Red Bull, because the consistency they have is staggering. And and now with, I guess, a resurgence in Mercedes and Hamilton, at least for this race, when you're competing against these drivers and these teams who know what it is to lead at the front, and they've done it for the past 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons, you need to be perfect. And I just don't think McLaren are being perfect at the moment.
Do you think maybe McLaren are kind of avoiding some responsibility in a way by asking Norris what tyre he wants to be on, because then it's his call rather than theirs? Because obviously they have the data, but then Norris does have the like the knowledge of the track surface, and he has that knowledge better than anyone at the team. And maybe you might ask that kind of question to more experienced drivers like Hamilton or Verstappen, perhaps. But do you think maybe they kind of didn't want to make the wrong decision themselves? I don't know. It felt like they weren't willing to make a decision themselves by asking Norris that question, and so
I
leaving it up to Norris so he wouldn't be angry with the team. It felt odd.
Well, I think perhaps. I mean, you're obviously directly comparing it to Verstappen and Red Bull and Hamilton and Mercedes, and both both teams were willing to defer to the driver when we had that, like, kind of short rain spell that didn't get wet enough for intermediates, but was kind of still difficult to drive in there. Like, everyone really deferred. Everyone in the top six at least deferred, or each team deferred to their driver. And then obviously we pit for inters, and I think that's where, like, it's kind of a mix between the driver and the team. And I think McLaren weren't bold enough in saying we can double stack. They didn't have the confidence in themselves. But it is when you're going out when it's clearly got dry enough for dry tyres, the team knows best which tyres are most likely to make it to the end of the race. And you saw in the cool down room, like, Hamilton and Verstappen were shocked that Norris had new mediums, because I think it must have been that Hamilton and Verstappen didn't have new mediums. I'd be very surprised if they reacted in that way and did still have the tyres to also do that. But when you look at how they reacted, like, it's a look of shock, because I think maybe both of them knew that the mediums would be the best tyre. They just weren't able to kind of utilize them because they didn't have any sets. But I think it is just, they'll get it. They will get it at some point. Norris and McLaren will become much better at dealing with these kind of leading scenarios. And I think it's when they get one that they win purely on merit that they'll start to think, okay, we can do this. And then you'll just start to see kind of that process, like, continue over and over again. But for the moment, they are just struggling. They're 95% of the way there. but they're missing that final 5%, and you need that final 5% to beat Verstappen, to beat Red Bull, and now if Mercedes are up there, to beat Hamilton and Mercedes as well. I mean, I don't know. Do you agree with that? I don't know how everyone else thinks about it.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think they're just lacking that kind of edge that perhaps Verstappen and Hamilton have just from their experience of winning. Because I think when Hamilton was in front, I don't know about everyone else, but you just felt that he was going to get to the end, because we've seen it so many times before that Hamilton's been in front, he's managed to stay in front, he's managed to control the race, but when McLaren are in front, you don't get that same confidence in them in a way, because you just know that someone's going to make a wrong call, or maybe Norris or Piastri might make a mistake or something. And I think it's just going to take a little while, just with time, really, and just having experience with the car as good as it is, that will almost allow that trust to be built, or that confidence to be built in the car, that they, as you mentioned, that they can go and control a race in that way. But I certainly think when McLaren were in front, I think I'd still be very surprised if I saw Norris or Piastri win on pure merit alone, rather than luck that was given their way, like in Miami. And not that I was not hoping. Like, I would have absolutely loved it if Norris or Piastri got a win there at Silverstone. But I'd also at the same time be very surprised, I think.
Adding on to that as well, I think that if you look at McLaren's performances like continuously over the year, they're definitely up there now. But as you said, at times it has been there needs to be a bit of luck on their side for it to I think all click, because they got the luck in Miami, they didn't get the luck this week, and you can see that they're still very hungry for it. I think they will keep improving, and they're going to become a real proper team over the next couple of years. But I can also, if we're just going to go back to the race winner himself, Hamilton, I think that he must be really worried about, about his Ferrari contract now after this weekend. I mean, my main thing I saw this weekend was just Ferrari were floundering mostly, and Sergio Perez as well. I mean, if we want to talk about that at all.
I mean, yeah, we may as well. We'll kind of move away from the top drivers for the moment and move on to, I guess, Ferrari and Perez, who, as you said, did have kind of a shocker. And it is probably a little bit of coping, because obviously Hamilton has now won in a Mercedes and now he's leaving Mercedes. I think Ferrari aren't as bad as their results have suggested over the last few weeks. I think they've had a lot of things go wrong, and I think it's a lot of what they've done. Like, the car is good, it's just they've done things that haven't been ideal. I mean, you had Sainz was a solid in sixth or fifth for most of the race, and I think it's fair to say that most people think Leclerc is the better driver, and I think they're guilty almost of trying too hard to recover stuff that's gone wrong, as opposed to cutting the losses. I think pitting the big mistake Leclerc and Perez made was pitting for intermediates in that first rain period, and as soon as you do that, your race is done, because it clearly wasn't wet enough to warrant a pit stop. And I just think at the moment it's very much they're in a little bit of a hole, and I think that's kind of emphasized more by the fact that Mercedes have kind of replaced them like near the top. And I think they're panicking a little bit, and when you panic, they're starting to make rash decisions, and those decisions are costing them points. But like for Leclerc, he has kind of got unlucky for the past few races in Canada. He obviously had engine issues from lap one. Austria, he collided with Piastri, broke his front wing. He's kind of out of the race. Silverstone is probably more I guess, his own fault, team's fault, pitting, like that issue, or not making it out of Q2, and then obviously pitting as well. But they're in a little bit of a hole. I don't think it's as bad as maybe the results have suggested.
Do you not think maybe though with Ferrari and Red Bull, or I say Red Bull, Perez, with I feel like in a way they kind of, because of the positions that they wound up in. Obviously, we can kind of critique the qualifying positions of Leclerc and Perez being off from where you would expect them to be. But given that they were in that position, I felt like maybe they felt like they had to do something different to try and get back up there. And obviously that's why they went into the intermediates, hoping maybe for a bit of extra rain later on in the race, and that meant that they could then basically undercut all of the other drivers when they put on those intermediates. And so they probably, because they were so behind, they saw the weather and thought, well, this is an opportunity that we can get back at the front, and it's just a risk that didn't pay off for them. So I think it's not, I wouldn't really critique, say, maybe Perez or Leclerc in this race as much as maybe they would on some of the previous races where they haven't finished as well, because I think this time they were just having to take that risk and it didn't pay off, but that's the chances that you get, really. And that's what I would say. So I wasn't, even though obviously Perez was in a terrible position and Leclerc also, again, quite a bad position, I didn't critique it as much as maybe previous results, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think for Perez, it's very much he's a product of his own downfall kind of thing. Like spinning out in Q1 is just it's a rookie error, and for a driver that experienced and in a car realistically that is that good, he can't be doing that. And he's obviously signed his 2-year contract and has fallen off, I think it's fair to say, since then. And I think, the clauses have apparently been announced that he's got to be less than 100 points or something like that behind Verstappen, and less than 5 places in the World Championship now. And he's more than 100 points. He's 5 places behind. And realistically, I would not be surprised if he was 8th in the World Championship after Hungary, because I think it's Hamilton and Russell are both, 7,
it's
8
very
points
close,
behind.
isn't it? Yeah, it's not like, we obviously haven't really mentioned Perez that much on podcasts in like the couple of recent episodes, but that's because you can only really say so many times that Perez is terrible, and before it gets kind of boring and repetitive on the episodes. So even though it's always been there, his results just have, like, it'd be an understatement to say that it hasn't been up to standard for Perez for the past few races. It has been diabolically bad, and he needs a very sudden a bit like what we were saying with Daniel Ricciardo really a little while ago. He needs a very sudden turnaround very soon if he has any hope of getting that Red Bull seat. And I don't really know where else he'd go. I mean, I guess that's a topic for another episode, but yeah, I want to see him back to where he was at the start of his Red Bull career, I suppose, back when we were all calling for him to stay on the grid, a bit like what we are with Carlos Sainz now. And yeah, I don't know what's happened to him. It's really strange, but he's certainly going to need to turn around soon.
Well, I saw a stat that both Perez and Leclerc, for the triple header, so for Spain, Austria, and Britain, have been outscored by Nico Hulkenberg over the triple header. So I think the only reasonable solution is Hulkenberg to Red Bull.
I mean, Hulkenberg we haven't even spoken about yet. He deserves so much credit. Like, the amount of points that he's racked up over these past few races. Another sixth place, am I correct? Or 7th place?
Yeah,
perhaps?
sixth
place. 6th place is in a Haas is mind-blowing. And
that Haas is good. it's a good car now.
Yeah, but I mean, Magnussen finished outside of the points, didn't he? So it was.
I think so. I think they had a new spec Hulkenberg was running, and an old spec Magnussen was running, which is a good sign if your new spec is finishing P6.
Is that far ahead? I mean, it's odd. Like, you think, like, I have a lot of love for Gunter Steiner, but it like, this is weird. It's maybe he is actually just washed as a race director, and now they've got a proper director of the team, and now look at them. It's actually incredible. But still, you can't take credit away from Nico Hulkenberg. He's been absolutely phenomenal, I think, over the past.
Maybe we'll get the Hulkenberg podium curse breaking. we've had
maybe
the Norris no wins is gone. We've had the Leclerc Monaco curse, that's gone. Hamilton's back on the top of the podium. I think it's time. It's time for a Nico Hulkenberg.
It's the next
podium.
one on the list. So we can expect. We'll have to put that into our predictions at some point.
Yeah. I mean, Chinmay, you're the resident kind of Red Bull fan here. What are your thoughts on kind of Perez and his performances over the past I guess the past few weeks, but also at Silverstone?
Well, questionable to say the least. Questionable. The thing is, it's a weird one because obviously that Red Bull, everyone knows how difficult that Red Bull is to kind of drive because of Max's driving style. So obviously, we've had the issue. It's been a recurring issue since 2019 about who's actually is that second driver's seat just really cursed? And I do have a belief in that. To be honest, that second Red Bull seat is just somewhat cursed, completely, mainly because of Verstappen. But then again, the fact that Perez is doing so diabolical at the moment, it's like, come on, like Max is at least he's still winning races. He's at the front of the grid, and there's Perez at points of he's literally almost become a backmarker, and the fact that he's not even reaching Q3, which it kind of says, I don't know whether it's confidence or whether he is just washed or what. Something has definitely just happened, and yeah. So I do feel bad for him because I do find him a really likable driver, and Papa Perez is a legend and all that sort of stuff. And as much as I really wanted to do well, I really think there needs to be a change now. I think it's now become time, and yeah, who succeeds him, I do not know.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess about the Ferraris as well. Do you think there is kind of cause for concern, or do you think they're just in a rough patch and they'll be able to get out of it?
I think with Ferrari, it's a matter of trying to understand the upgrades, which obviously they haven't, or there's just something fundamentally wrong with the upgrades, which basically has had jeopardized the actual performance of the car in general. We've seen it before with Haas, and sort of like the earlier on, a few years ago, when they started bringing upgrades, and the next thing you know, that car literally eats its tires alive. So it could just be the upgrades have just somehow gone one step backwards and just have unintended consequences. But then again, there's also, I do feel both drivers have just had a confidence knock, especially Leclerc, which is the unluckiness, bad strategy calls, etc. So, yeah, it's just a combination of everything at the moment, and hopefully, I count on Vasseur to bring it all back up.
We did kind of expect Ferrari to not be quite there for especially Spain and Silverstone with its high-speed corners. So yeah. I'd say they wouldn't be. I'd say they'd be more concerned with the Austria result, and maybe I think for going to Hungary in 2 weeks' time, this will be the one that they're really going to try and crack down on, because I think if they don't get this one, then it's maybe a more of a cause for concern for the rest of their season and in their kind of battle for second in the championship with Mercedes and McLaren. And certainly Ferrari will be excited to get back to the street circuits and the low speed corner circuits, as we know that's where that they've been impressive in the first part of the season. So I'd say I'd say they wouldn't be concerned yet, but Fred Vasseur is certainly going to be looking forward to getting that triple header out of the way, I'd say, and onto circuits that hopefully more suit their car. But then this is something that Ferrari need to improve on. We've kind of probably been speaking for the past few years that Ferrari, the car doesn't maybe suit the circuit and suits others, but if they're going to make that next step forward, and keep Hamilton happy next season, then they're going to need to create a car which works everywhere, really.
Yeah, well, obviously we'll have to wait and see. I mean, is there any other drivers people want to mention, people want to talk about?
I've actually
maybe forgotten to
maybe a surprise. Well, something we haven't actually mentioned for a while because it seems obvious, but actually someone who I'd like to give a lot of credit to this race is Max Verstappen, because I think it was in a Red Bull car that wasn't like as we've seen it before. It was, as Martin Brundle put it, normal for once. But I think Verstappen really still gave a very mature and confident drive. He made, as his race engineer pointed out, he made a lot of correct calls in when they went to the intermediates and also going to the hard tyre in the third stint as well. And I'd say Verstappen would probably be quite happy with a second place, given where he ended up in qualifying and where he was in the first part of the race and the poor pace that the Red Bull car had when the rain started to come down. And I think he'll be moderately happy with the result he had, given that it was second place. And I still think he drove, even though his car maybe wasn't up to its usual standards, I think Verstappen can still be happy with the drive that he made. Is that just me, or do you?
No, I think I agree as well. I think that even like you saw on Saturday, he qualifies in fourth, and I think everyone's still like, "Oh my god, he's still such a massive threat." I was interested in this, and I did some digging into kind of his results. And as far as I'm aware, outside of Monaco, where we know it's impossible to overtake, this was the first time he started in the top four and didn't lead a lap in the race since, I think, Hungary 2021, where obviously he started in the top four and then got taken out right at the start.
That is very impressive. I think definitely what was my impression and what everyone else's impression was, I'm guessing, is like, even though Verstappen is starting in fourth, you think he can do so much damage there. Like, very easy. Like, all you need him to do is overtake. I could easily see him overtaking Norris into the first corner, and then suddenly he's at the back of the Mercedes, and then it's Verstappen's race to win. And so that kind of gives credit to Verstappen, and owing to the reputation that we know he has, that he's seen as such a threat from there. And I'd say the only reason that he wasn't able to get the race win this weekend is mainly because of the performance in the car, which is weird to say that the Red Bull car isn't up to standard. I think it's allowed an off race for once in every 3 years. But yeah, I think he could be happy with that performance.
Yeah, and I think as well, we haven't mentioned him, but George Russell, like, he was doing everything he could be doing until his engine, or it was a water system issue, I think. Like, that's just really unlucky. There's really nothing else to say about it.
Yeah, that's just racing at the end of the day, though. I guess not everyone's going to be lucky. But yeah, credit to George Russell, though. He has actually showed up today. He did show up at Silverstone and recently as well.
We should also as well mention, as Oscar is on the episode, we should also mention Aston Martin with a good performance, which I think they were catching a break, I'd say. Oscar, would you agree with this, that this is the kind of break that Aston Martin needed with their recent performances?
Yeah, I mean, it's relief more than anything else. I mean, the last two races have been like I'm trying to scratch my eyes out sometimes, trying to watch the car go around. But no, it was a very welcome change. Stroll was able to keep a Ferrari behind for how long? I don't even know. But they were able to have some fight on Sunday that I haven't seen them be able to do in quite a while. And I don't know what's changed, because obviously they brought upgrades and then the car started to not perform as well. So is it a case of, have they fixed those upgrades so that they actually are upgrades, or is it that they've just taken them off? Because I don't know what's happened, or maybe it's just a good track. But yeah, it was definitely welcome to see both Aston Martin drivers fighting for good points in the end and putting Stroll back into the top 10 of drivers.
Actually, and just a final thing as well, Alex Albon, P9, and my favourite driver on the grid.
I thought we'd have to give that a mention. That was a good drive from him.
And Logan Sargent, to be fair to him, right? To be fair to him, Logan Sargent P11 and not too far behind Alex Albon.
How can you give credit to him? He didn't score points.
It's better than he normally does.
Yeah, but that's like saying dog poop. Oh, it's not that bad actually this time.
That's so rude of you.
I think yes, from his recent standards, it wasn't terrible.
He wasn't far behind Albon, and I think in a car that isn't maybe the best in the world, a P11 is a good performance. Like, if he needs to be doing, if he does that more regularly, then he deserves a spot in F1 more than obviously a lot of people are saying he does at the moment, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that.
Cool.
Should we move on to predictions?
Yes, we should. I had first pick. I don't care that I didn't get it right. Lewis Hamilton won. Although it does continue my streak of getting Verstappen. Like, it is me. It must be me at the end of the day. Because
that's how it has gone, really, hasn't it? Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Right, you've got all the predictions, Callum, I think. Or what are the current scores on the doors?
Right, well, I'm going to have to... So this is going to be interesting. I'm going to have to try and look at my notes without stopping the recording. Right, let's... Because I'm doing it on my phone this time. So the current scores are Will Biddles, who I picked for this week. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us today. Is leading on 70. Chinmay is on 69 and Will Kingswood is on 68.
Okay. Right, well, I'll go first then. I went for Verstappen, Norris, Hamilton, Leclerc and Russell. So I got all of the top three, just in the complete wrong order. And obviously Leclerc and Russell didn't end up scoring in the top five or scoring points in the end. So that's a nice solid 3 points from my top five, which is horrific. Then I went for Haas or Alpine score points. Obviously we had the Hulkenberg P6, so he got points there. 2+ British drivers on the podium for my 2 points, and obviously we had Hamilton and Norris, and then a crash for the lead for my 3-pointer, and I am so thankful that one was wrong. So that is 6 points overall.
6 points overall, so that puts you on to 74 points.
Cool.
Very nice. So who was? I believe it was me next. For Will Biddles. So I went with Norris. Obviously, expected a bit more of the battle that we saw in Austria, which we did at some stages, but with the arrival of the Mercedes, which perhaps we didn't say. So I said Norris and then Verstappen. Obviously, they were both up on the podium, but in the wrong order. I said Piastri P3. I think he definitely had a potential to get a podium today, although I think he got quite unlucky with definitely the pit stops at least. Then I said Hamilton P4, which obviously he was in the top five, and then Leclerc P5, hoping for a bit of resurgence that didn't happen, unfortunately. So that will be what's that? 3 points from my top five.
You got Verstappen. You got Verstappen P2.
Oh no, I got Verstappen P2. Yeah, that's true. So that would be 5 points from my top five. 5 points from my top five. Not bad.
So not 6 points. So you had Norris P1. That's 1 point. Verstappen 3 points. That's 4 points, and then Hamilton and Piastri makes 6, doesn't it?
Was Piastri?
Piastri was top five. He was
Oh,
fourth, I
Piastri's
think.
P5. Okay, right, I'm stupid, yeah. Sorry, 6 points for that. I don't know why I thought Piastri finished lower than he did. So yeah, sorry, 6 points, yes, you're correct. 6 points from my top 5. And then you should have kept it realistically and,
Yeah, I know.
and reduced the points.
Being too honest.
And then for my 1 point, I said Norris would get driver of the day from the recent races where he always seems to, but quite understandably he didn't. But my 2 point prediction was that Hamilton does a lap after the race holding a British flag, which did happen. And my 3 point prediction was a driver crashes and retires at Stowe and Vale. We did actually get that in the F3 feature race on the Sunday, but we did not get it in F1. So that puts Will Biddles getting a total of 8 points, which puts him on 78 in total. Not bad.
Right. Yep. So I guess for me then, I was lucky because I actually put Hamilton first.
Oh, unbelievable.
Actually lucky having the last
Yeah.
pick and forced
Yeah.
to pick Hamilton.
I honestly I was quite surprised on that. And my other top 5 was Norris, Piastri, Sainz, and Verstappen. So everyone, but in the wrong order. So I actually did quite decently, I think, this time around. So I think that
That's 7 points. It should be, I think. He's gone again.
Is he going to get? Oh, I thought he was just taking a while with his maths.
Doing the maths.
Yeah.
No, I think that's 7 points.
Let me just say, I do have them here. So that's Hamilton correct, so that's 3 points. And then, Norris, Piastri, Sainz, and Verstappen, so that's 4. So yes, 7 points for Chinmay.
Yeah.
I think he's back. Yeah, he's back.
yes, I'm back. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So for my 1 pointer, I had at least a double pit stop race, which I believe happened.
It was indeed with the
was.
intermediates and the drive
Yes.
in. Yep.
Yep. I said for my 2 pointer, I said neither Aston Martin reaches Q3, but Lance Stroll did reach Q3.
I
And then,
think Oscar might punish you for that lack of faith in
Yeah.
Lance Stroll.
well, yeah. Unfortunately, that's just Aston Martin these days. But then, and then my 3 pointer, I said that all British-based teams, so basically everyone but Ferrari, Haas, Sauber, and RB would be in the points. So, as far as I can
That
tell,
happened?
I think you got that.
I think no.
All the
Alpine.
teams-
Race teams. So we had Mercedes, McLaren,
Did
Aston
Alpine-
Martin, Williams.
Alpine's
lost it
based in
for you.
Enstone, don't
Alpine lost
forget.
it for you, of course.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was Alpine. Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, because those were the 2 teams that we because it was the reason it's a 3 point prediction was Williams and Alpine, and Williams didn't let you down with Alex Albon.
Yeah,
but
and
Alpine
Alpine-
did unfortunately let you down.
Yeah.
I mean, Gasly's car just gave up the ghost. It did the formation lap. Was like coming on anymore.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So what's that in total for you, Chinmay?
That's 8 points.
8 points as well. So that puts Will Biddle still ahead on 78, Chinmay 1 behind on 77, and Will Kingswood lacking on 74.
I know.
Gonna have
Needs
to be
catch
better
up a
for
little bit.
Hungary.
Yeah.
Anyone got any final words before we end it off?
I don't know. I think I'm good. I think we've covered.
I
We've
just
covered
like
a very good
Hamilton.
race quite extensively.
I just like seeing Hamilton back at the top. I was so stressed for those final few laps.
I thought you
Unbelievable.
might be, yeah.
Unbelievably
I
stressed.
can
The
only
longest
imagine.
12 laps that you've ever seen.
I was just watching the timing screens, my head in my hands. But no, good race, good winner, and hopefully we can get more of it for the rest of the season. So that has been the Warwick F1 show for today, and thank you for listening.